HOA officers raided my house. I sued the board individually since I'm not a member. The battering ram hit my front door at 6:47 a.m. and I was still in my bathrobe when 4 strangers marched into my living room. HOA compliance inspection, the woman in front barked, waving a laminated badge like it meant something legal. My name is Erica Voss, 34, a paralegal who never once thought her own home would become a courtroom. I didn't even know that badge was homemade until 3 weeks later, printed on a laser printer in someone's garage. But right then, all I could do was stand frozen, coffee mug shaking in my hand, watching them open my hallway closet. "You can't be in here," I said, and the woman laughed like I'd told a joke. "Section 4.2 of the covenants gives us right of entry," she said. "You signed it." I hadn't signed anything. I wasn't even an HOA member. That detail would matter more than she knew. 6 months earlier, I'd bought a modest 3-bedroom on Larkspur Court, the last house on a quiet cul-de-sac in Danbury Ridge. The listing agent mentioned an HOA existed but assured me my particular lot, a legacy parcel from the original 1987 subdivision, was exempt. I had the deed. I had the title report. Exempt in black and white, filed at the county recorder's office. Still, that didn't stop Marlene Combs, HOA board president, from treating my mailbox flag like a personal insult. Marlene ran that community the way some people run cults, with smiles at the potlucks and knives behind the newsletters. The first letter came 2 weeks after I moved in, a $150 fine for unauthorized mailbox color. I called the management company. They looked me up and said, plainly, "Ma'am, you're not in our system as a member." I forwarded that email to Marlene. She never replied. The fines kept coming anyway. By month 3, I owed, according to her ledger, $2,400 in violations for grass height, a garden gnome and a non-compliant wreath. I laughed the first time. By the 5th letter, I stopped laughing and started a folder. That folder would grow into the thing that ended her reign. I want to be clear, I'm not a vindictive person by nature. I return shopping carts. I let people merge in traffic. But something about watching a woman with a laminated badge invent authority over my life lit a fuse I didn't know I had. Neighbors warned me early. "Just pay it," said Doug across the street. "She'll make your life hell otherwise." Doug had already caved twice. His new fence, HOA approved on paper, still got him fined for improper stain shade. Everyone paid. Everyone folded. That was the system Marlene had built, fear dressed up as bylaws. I decided, quietly, that I would not fold. I would document. Every letter, every certified mail receipt, every photo of my objectively fine lawn, went into a growing binder labeled HOA. I didn't know yet that binder would end up as Exhibit A in a civil suit. In April, Marlene sent a final notice, threatening a lien on a property she had no legal jurisdiction over. I sent her, by certified mail, my recorded deed excerpt showing my lot's 1987 exemption clause. She responded with a single line, "The board disagrees with your interpretation." That was the first time I realized this wasn't about rules. It was about control. I asked a colleague at the law firm, a real estate litigator named Priya, to glance at my file over lunch. Priya read 2 pages, looked up and said, "Erica, this woman doesn't have a legal leg to stand on. Not one. So why does everyone pay her?" I asked. "Because most people don't know that," Priya said. "Ignorance is her entire business model." That sentence rearranged something in my head. I stopped seeing Marlene as an annoyance and started seeing her as an opportunity. I began attending HOA meetings, silent, in the back row, taking notes no one asked for. Marlene ran those meetings like a queen holding court, cutting off objections, tabling anything inconvenient. I watched her steer a vote on landscaping funds toward a company that, it turned out later, her husband partly owned. Nobody else seemed to notice. Or if they did, nobody dared say it out loud. In May, my violations total crossed $4,000. A lien threat letter arrived, this time from an actual attorney. I called that attorney's office directly. The paralegal there sounded surprised anyone had questioned it before. "Send us your deed," she said. "We'll review." I did. I never heard from that firm again. Small victory. But Marlene didn't back down, she escalated. She started parking a folding table at the community entrance, randomly checking cars for stickers. Mine, of course, never had one, because I wasn't a member and had never been issued one. She had my car towed on a Tuesday morning while I was getting ready for court. $600 to get it back. I paid it, seething, and photographed every receipt. That tow was the mistake that started her downfall, though none of us knew it yet. Because towing a non-member's vehicle from a public adjacent street isn't a bylaw violation. It's a legal one. I brought the tow receipt to Priya. She went very quiet, then very focused. "This isn't a nuisance case anymore," she said. "This is conversion, harassment, and possibly fraud." I felt something shift in my chest, not fear this time. Resolve. "I want to sue," I told her. "Not the HOA. Her. Personally." Priya smiled, the kind of smile lawyers get when a case turns interesting. "Now we're talking." We began building the file for real: notarized deed history, tow records, certified mail logs, meeting minutes. I requested official HOA financial records under my state's disclosure statutes, fully expecting a stonewall. Marlene's assistant treasurer, a nervous man named Todd, accidentally sent me the wrong attachment. Instead of the redacted summary, I got the full ledger, 3 years of it. What I found in those numbers would blow this whole thing wide open. Buried in tab 14 of that spreadsheet was a line item: landscaping consulting, Combs Brothers LLC, $38,400. Combs Brothers LLC. Marlene's maiden name was Combs. Her brother-in-law ran a 2-truck lawn service. The HOA had paid nearly $40,000 over 2 years to a company with no other clients, no website, no listing. I sat at my kitchen table at midnight, screen glowing, and felt my hands go cold. This wasn't overreach anymore. This was theft dressed up in HOA letterhead. I forwarded the file to Priya at 1 a.m. Her reply came 7 minutes later: "Don't touch anything. Don't confront her. Not yet." The plan, she said, needed to be surgical, not emotional. Evidence first. Confrontation last. We filed a formal records request for every contract Marlene's board had approved in the last 5 years. The management company, sensing liability, suddenly became very cooperative. Within 2 weeks I had bank statements, board meeting audio, and vendor invoices stacked a foot high. Meanwhile, Marlene had no idea her own treasurer's fumbled email had cracked her kingdom open. She kept fining me. A birdbath violation arrived that week, ironic timing considering what I now knew. I paid every fine on time, smiling, because a woman building a fraud case doesn't want to look angry. She wanted a fight. I gave her paperwork instead. It confused her more than rage ever could have. At the June meeting, a resident named Grace Liu, 2 doors down, stood up and asked about landscaping costs. Marlene deflected instantly: "Those numbers are proprietary vendor information." I almost laughed out loud. HOA finances aren't proprietary. They're disclosable by law in this state. Grace caught my eye across the room. I gave her the smallest nod. She'd become an ally, though neither of us said it yet. After the meeting, Grace approached me in the parking lot. "You've been documenting everything, haven't you?" "Every fine," I said. "Every threat. Every dollar." Grace exhaled like she'd been holding her breath for years. "She towed my mother's car last winter. My mother has a disability placard." That detail would become one of our strongest exhibits, an ADA-adjacent harassment claim stacked on top of the fraud. More residents started quietly reaching out after that, each with their own folder, their own grievance, their own fear of retaliation. Doug admitted his fence fines had cost him nearly $3,000 over 2 years. A retired teacher named Walt showed me a lien Marlene had filed against his paid-off house over an unmowed lawn, while he was in the hospital. Each story was its own small injustice. Together, they were a pattern. Patterns are what juries believe. Priya filed the initial complaint in July, Voss versus Combs, individually and as an officer acting outside authority. Marlene was served on her own doorstep, in front of her rose bushes, by a process server who later told me she smiled the whole time. That smile wouldn't last. 2 days later, Marlene called an emergency board meeting and accused me, by name, of attacking this community. Someone recorded it. Someone always records it. That recording landed in my inbox within the hour. On the tape, she said the quiet part loud, "If she wins this, all of you owe her fines back. Do you understand what that means for us?" Us. Not the HOA. Us. As in her and her brother-in-law's landscaping money. That single pronoun became one of Priya's favorite pieces of evidence. Marlene's attorney sent a cease and desist, claiming I was harassing board members. It had no legal weight and Priya said so in writing. Then came the retaliation, the kind you can't always prove but always feel. My trash bins were accidentally left uncollected for 3 weeks straight, despite dues I didn't legally owe. A noise complaint was filed against me for a dog I don't own. Someone spray-painted a crude message on my driveway at 3 a.m. No cameras caught it. Convenient. I photographed it anyway, filed a police report anyway, added it to the folder anyway. Grace's HVAC unit got flagged for unauthorized placement the same week she testified in a deposition against Marlene. The timing wasn't subtle. Retaliation rarely is, once you're looking for it. I started keeping a second camera, this one aimed at my own driveway, running 24 hours a day. 3 nights later, it caught something none of us expected. At 6:12 a.m., before that battering ram morning, my camera recorded Marlene herself, alone, taping something to my door. It wasn't a notice. It was a photograph of my car, annotated with a red circle and the words, "Repeat offender." She'd been building her own file on me, the same way I'd been building mine on her. Except mine had bank records. Hers had a marker and a grudge. That footage went straight to Priya and straight into the growing evidence binder. By August, the lawsuit had expanded: fraud, breach of fiduciary duty, harassment, and now trespass with video proof. Marlene's insurer, once informed of the fraud allegations, quietly declined to cover her legal defense. That meant she was now paying her own attorney, out of pocket, for a fight she'd started over a mailbox flag. Word travels fast in a cul-de-sac. By September, half the neighborhood had stopped speaking to her at the mailbox cluster. The other half were too scared of fines to say anything out loud, but they waved at me differently now. I kept working my actual job during all of this, filing briefs by day, filing motions by night. Priya warned me that Marlene wouldn't go down easy. Women like her never do. She'll try something big before this goes to trial, Priya said. Watch your back. I didn't know how right she was. Because 3 weeks later came the morning with the battering ram, the badge, and the 4 strangers in my living room. "Show me your warrant," I said, voice steadier than I felt. "HOA compliance doesn't need a warrant," the woman said, though her eyes flicked toward the door like she wasn't sure. I recognized her now, Marlene's sister-in-law, listed in the leaked ledger as consultant, no formal role. Behind her stood 2 men in matching polos and a younger woman filming everything on her phone. "Get out of my house," I said, pulling my own phone out and hitting record. "We have reason to believe you're storing unauthorized business inventory," the woman announced, like she'd rehearsed it. "I run a small side business shipping vintage jewelry. Legal. Licensed. None of the HOA's business, let alone one I wasn't a member of." "You have 30 seconds to leave before I call the police," I said. They didn't leave. That was their second mistake of the morning. I called 911 with my other hand, calmly, clearly, giving my address and stating 4 unknown people had forced entry into my home. 2 patrol cars arrived in under 6 minutes. Danbury Ridge PD does not play around with home invasions. 1:31, the officers separated everyone, took statements and asked Marlene's sister-in-law for identification. Her compliance officer badge turned out to be a laminated Canva template with a clip-art seal. "Ma'am, this isn't a real badge," one officer said, turning it over in his hand like it was a punchline. She had no answer. None of them did. The responding officer looked at me and asked, "Do you want to press charges for unlawful entry?" I looked at the folder sitting on my kitchen counter, 3 inches thick now, and said, "Yes. All of it." That morning generated a police report, 4 witness statements and body cam footage that Priya would later call a gift from the universe. Marlene wasn't there in person. She'd sent her enforcers and stayed home, hands clean, or so she thought. But the sister-in-law, rattled and scared of her own charges, said something in her statement that changed everything. Marlene told us to get into the house before the court date. She said the case would be dismissed if there was nothing left to find. In other words, destroy evidence, then argue there was never any wrongdoing. That statement was recorded, signed and time-stamped. It was obstruction, plain and simple. Priya filed an emergency motion the same afternoon, adding attempted evidence tampering to the growing list of claims. The judge granted a temporary restraining order barring Marlene and any board affiliate from approaching my property. For the first time since the mailbox flag, I slept without checking the driveway camera every hour. Marlene's attorney tried to withdraw 2 weeks later. Publicly. In a court filing. That's never a good sign for a client. A new attorney took over, clearly hired for damage control, not for winning. He requested a settlement meeting. Priya let me sit in, silent, as he offered to waive all outstanding fines in exchange for dropping the suit. I almost laughed. The fines were never legally owed in the first place. That offer was worth nothing. "We're not interested," Priya said, sliding the folder of financial records 2 inches across the table. The attorney's face changed the moment he saw the tab labeled Combs Brothers LLC, Unauthorized Vendor Payments. "Where did you get this?" he asked quietly. "Discovery," Priya said. "And it gets better from here." He left the meeting 20 minutes later, visibly paler than when he'd arrived. Grace testified the following month about her mother's towed car and the disability placard ignored on the tow slip. Walt testified about the lien filed while he lay in a hospital bed recovering from surgery. Doug testified about $3,000 in fence fines for a fence that had been HOA approved in writing. Each story stacked onto mine, and the pattern the jury saw wasn't a woman enforcing rules. It was a woman running a shakedown. Marlene took the stand herself, insisting every fine was, in the interest of community standards. Priya asked her, plainly, to define the community standard that justified paying her own brother-in-law $40,000. Marlene's answer rambled for nearly 2 minutes and explained nothing. Then Priya played the recording. "If she wins this, all of you owe her fines back. Do you understand what that means for us?" The courtroom went silent. Even Marlene's own new attorney looked down at his legal pad. Next came the driveway footage, Marlene, alone, at 6:12 a.m., photographing my car like a stalker building a case out of spite. Then the badge. The laminated, clip art, homemade badge, entered as Exhibit 22. Then the sister-in-law's signed statement. Marlene told us to get into the house before the court date. By the time Priya rested our case, half the jury wasn't taking notes anymore. They were just watching Marlene. Her defense called exactly one witness, Todd, the assistant treasurer who'd accidentally leaked the ledger. On cross-examination, Todd admitted he'd been instructed to keep 2 sets of books, one for residents, one real. That sentence effectively ended the trial before closing arguments even began. The jury deliberated for 2 hours and 11 minutes. When the foreperson stood, I gripped Grace's hand so hard I left a mark. "We find in favor of the plaintiff on all counts," the foreperson read. Fraud. Breach of fiduciary duty. Harassment. Trespass. Conversion. Every single one. Damages were set at $187,000, actual losses, punitive damages and legal fees, awarded against Marlene personally, not the HOA. Personally. Her house, her savings, her name on the judgment, exactly as I'd sued her from day one. The county, upon receiving the court record, opened a separate criminal referral for the fraudulent badge and forced entry. Marlene was removed from the HOA board within a week, per an emergency clause none of us had known existed until Priya found it. The new interim board, led by Grace, sent every resident a full refund of improperly assessed fines, going back 3 years. Doug got his $3,000 back. Walt got his lien released with a formal apology letter attached. I sat in my kitchen that evening with the folder, now 4 inches thick, and felt something unclench in my chest for the first time in a year. It wasn't triumph exactly. It was quieter than that. It was just relief. The next morning, my trash got picked up on schedule for the first time in months. Small thing. But it felt enormous. Grace stopped by with coffee and we sat on my porch, the one that used to get photographed and circled in red marker. You know, she said, none of us would have done anything without your folder. I just wrote things down, I said. Anyone could have. No, she said. Anyone could have been scared into not doing it. You weren't. I thought about that for a long time after she left. Marlene's house went up for sale 2 months later, motivated seller sign practically glowing with irony. I heard through Doug that she'd moved out of state, somewhere with, apparently, no HOA at all. Small mercies for whatever neighborhood inherits her next. The criminal case over the forced entry moved slower, but it moved. A plea deal came through by winter. Marlene's sister-in-law got probation and a permanent note in her employment record for impersonating an official. Marlene herself faced a civil fraud judgment that would follow her for years, garnishing wages wherever she landed. I won't pretend the money fixed everything. Legal fees ate a real chunk of the settlement. But something else got fixed that mattered more. An entire community stopped being afraid of a laminated badge. The new board adopted actual transparent bookkeeping, posted online, updated monthly, boring in the best possible way. Boring is good. Boring means nobody's stealing. I kept my binder. I still have it, actually, tucked on a shelf next to my law school textbooks. Sometimes new neighbors ask me about it, half joking, half serious. Is it true you sued the HOA president? Not the HOA, I always correct them. Her. Personally. There's a difference and it's the difference that mattered. Because HOAs can hide behind corporate shields. People who abuse power inside them can't always hide behind the same wall. If you dig into the bylaws, if you read the fine print, if you refuse to fold the first time someone hands you a fake authority, sometimes you find the crack. And once you find the crack, you don't need rage to break it open. You just need patience, paperwork and one very good lawyer. Grace and I still have coffee most Sundays. Walt brings tomatoes from a garden nobody finds him for anymore. Doug finally repainted that fence, the exact shade he wanted, no letters, no threats, no 48-hour warnings. Todd, oddly enough, apologized to me at the grocery store last spring. I told him the accidental email probably saved the whole neighborhood. He didn't quite smile, but something in his shoulders relaxed. As for the badge, the real, actual, laminated evidence of the whole absurd scheme, it sits in a labeled evidence box at the courthouse now. Somewhere, in a file cabinet, there is official government paperwork proving a woman invented a law enforcement title out of clip art. I think about that sometimes when I water my once fine flower beds. Power, I learned, isn't always loud. Sometimes it's a woman with a folder, showing up to every meeting, saying nothing, writing everything down. Marlene thought silence meant surrender. It never did. It just meant I was building something she couldn't see coming. The morning they broke into my house was supposed to be her victory lap. Instead, it became Exhibit 1 in the case that ended her. I still don't have an HOA sticker on my car. I never needed one. I do have a court judgment with her name on it, though, framed, admittedly, in a drawer I open more often than I should. Not out of spite. Just as a reminder that documentation beats intimidation, every single time. People ask if I'd do it all again, knowing the stress, the sleepless nights, the fake badge in my living room. Without hesitation, yes. Because somewhere down this cul-de-sac, there's a retired teacher who almost lost his paid-off home to a fraudulent lien. There's a mother with a disability placard who got her dignity back. There's a whole street of people who used to whisper about the board and now just talk, openly, at barbecues, about nothing more dramatic than weather. That, more than the settlement check, is what victory actually looks like. The cost was real, a year of stress, thousands in legal fees before the judgment came through, nights spent staring at ceiling fans instead of sleeping. Winning doesn't erase what it took to get there. I still flinch a little at the sound of a doorbell before 7 a.m. But I answer it now. I don't freeze. That's the part nobody tells you about fighting someone like Marlene. Even after you win, you're left rebuilding the parts of yourself that learn to be afraid. Some mornings that rebuilding is slow. Most mornings, it's just coffee on the porch with grace and quiet. Danbury Ridge doesn't have a queen anymore. It has a board that answers questions instead of avoiding them. It has residents who know their rights instead of assuming the worst. And it has one house on the cul-de-sac with a slightly crooked mailbox flag, left that way on purpose. Nobody's ever fined me for it again. Sometimes justice doesn't roar. Sometimes it's just a mailbox flag nobody dares touch anymore. I think Marlene, wherever she landed, still doesn't understand what she lost that morning she taped a photo to my door. She thought she was building a case against me. She was actually building the case that would end her. And every time I pull into my driveway now, past the camera that once caught her in the dark, I remember, the paper trail always wins.